Welcome to In Front of Ira.
We're Sabrina.
And Torsten.
Two historians.
And friends.
And lovers.
Of romantic comedies.
And this is the podcast in which we answer the age-old question.
Will they? Or won't they?
Is it or isn't it a romantic comedy?
Technically, that's two questions. Let's get on with the show. I'm changing it. I'm changing it. Yeah,
we'll have to do something. But this is the podcast where, for once, I think we're gonna really show you that we're historians because
kind of accidentally,
sort of, because this is about the 1953 classic Roman holiday.
Holiday,
which logically means I will have to talk about the House Un-American Committee a lot.
Yeah.
And if you don't know why, at least you will learn something.
And also European Federation is going to be a thing.
That's going to be a thing.
I think... Sorry, you go ahead.
I mean, you can also tell us the plot, so I can be...
The plot of Roman Holiday. Well, first of all, I think the reason why this is the first one where we both felt the historian in us coming out, really in a big way, is because it is from 1953. This is a mid-20th century comedy. This isn't in any way, shape, or form a time which we can say, oh, we lived through that. We kind of remember that, and it doesn't feel foreign to us. It is very clearly history. It's contemporary history still, I guess, because it's 20th century history, and depending on how you wanna stretch that. But it is history, and we're not very far. We're about not even a decade after World War II. This is shot entirely in Rome. So, okay, it's called Roman Holiday, not because, as I always assumed, it was some kind of vacation that they were on, but because she's taking a day off from her job of being a princess, and that's the holiday as they reference it in the movie. This movie is kind of the movie that begat 1,000 Netflix rom-coms where princesses meet regular people. It's about Gregory Peck, who plays an American correspondent in Rome, and he is supposed to do an interview with the princess of unnamed country, which I have thoughts on this. The next day, and instead he finds himself going back home and finding this very kind of drugged, sleepy girl just lying on one of the ruins in Rome. And the background for that is it's Audrey Hepburn. She is a princess, and she had a big day of being a princess, and all the kind of strictures that come with that.
Day, a big everything, a big life apparently.
A big life.
Every day they schedule her from every minute of her day is scheduled with some kind of important cultural visit, meetings, dignitaries and whatever. And we also, the first scene we have of her sort of meeting people, and
and she gets introduced as being on kind of a European goodwill tour.
Yeah.
Which I mean, there is the thing that I kept thinking about, because of course now it's the 2020s and a lot of other things that happened, is this is what the Princess Switch wanted to be all along. There's so much in terms of the references that go that. Okay, so she's a princess. And then she then basically has kind of a nervous breakdown about being a princess, and the doctor who gets called to her bedside prescribes her a pill which he calls a new drug, very safe, and I'm going oh no. There's so much to think about here. And so she takes the pill, and that's why she's kind of out of it and sleepy. And but she sees down from her, I think it's the embassy where she's at, her window, the Romans having fun and dancing and doing all these things. And so she wants to be part of that. And in her drugged state, just kind of escapes to the city.
Yeah, and it's also before I think the drugs actually kick in. Obviously, she's escaped, she runs away, but then this weird sleeping pill pill injection, whatever, kicks in, and she is suddenly falling asleep.
It's explained when she takes the drugs. She first says, "Oh, I don't feel anything," so she probably just assumes she's not going to feel anything.
So yeah, and then Gregory Peck finds her and then realizes the day after that this is the princess, and this sort of the conceit of he's trying to get this obviously exclusive story of the princess spending a day as a commoner essentially, and of course falls in love with her, and then in the end decides not to run the story, not give his editor the story.
Yeah.
And she sort of is emancipated through this day. She cuts her hair, and there's all these things that she does she normally wouldn't do, and goes to a party, and the authorities try to find her, and she falls into the water, and it's all very it's all.
It's fun. It's
she rides a Vespa with Gregory Peck on the back, which I think one is the sort of, it's on a poster, it's on the trailer, that is the shot.
It's on the Blu-ray menu. Yeah. And the two things that really struck me about this movie is A, how close it is to today's romantic comedies, and B, how it still very much is of its time, and the storytelling is just so slow in comparison to so much of what's going on.
I actually, I'm gonna out myself and say I really struggle. Usually when I try to go back to a lot of these films, because they're classics for a reason and they're not bad, but I'm at a point where I really struggle with the pacing somehow. There's newer movies that are slower paced. Pretty Woman doesn't feel that fast paced that we just did.
No, but things happen. Nothing happens in this,
and this is very much nothing much happens with this.
It's like an Eric Romer movie in which people don't talk enough for it to be worth it, that nothing happens. It's very peculiar, and it is a 2-hour movie. This is an hour. It's almost 120 minutes to the dot. And today you would fit this into 90 minutes, easy. You could easily edit this down to 90 minutes, which is where I found myself disagreeing with Leonard Maltin, who has a little featurette on the disc saying "Oh, every scene in this movie is perfect. You couldn't change anything." I'm like, no, I beg to differ. You could easily cut 20 minutes.
I'm happy to cut 20 minutes of this. I'm sorry. This probably someone's gonna cancel us. But yeah, but it's her day away. There's some, it's not it's obviously still a good movie, and I get why it's a classic, and obviously at the time, if those were your viewing conventions, then it probably would have been the perfect movie, which is the crucial difference. I don't know what if 1953 audience member thinks about this, and I think that's the difference. They're used to the pacing of this. This is what movies are like.
Yeah. It felt like a play. The pacing is basically a play. A play is about that long. A play, you also are kind of like a captive audience. And I think this really is, because we both watched this obviously on screens of various kinds at home. And in the theater in the 1950s, this would have been the thing you did that week, right? So it's a very different experience.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, I also because I also had never seen it, I finally got now why Notting Hill ends on a press conference.
Horse and Hound agrees. Yeah,
Horse and Hound.
It's very clear. Yeah,
and obviously the ending of this is notably different. They don't actually end up together in the end, right? It is,
which I was actually surprised by.
Transformation.
Yeah.
And sort of, having this different experience. So nothing much happens between them and kissing. Obviously, this is also Hays Code time, so nothing much else could have happened between them. But yeah, it's sort of that. Because they're not married as well, so
there's a lot of kind of running around of them not being able to be in the same bed, and him putting her on the couch and all that kind of thing. It's actually but I actually thought because the trope is always right that you have
only one bed.
You have only one bed, and either it's you need to share the bed, or the guy takes the couch. That's the way it's done. And Gregory Peck is having none of that. Gregory Peck is falls asleep on the couch. She falls asleep on the bed. He moves her to the couch, and only when he realizes she's a princess, he basically in a very funny scene picks her up and like wants to put her back on the bed in the most convoluted way possible. So he walks around the bed and then she's the wrong way around, and he just basically like has her sleep the wrong way around in the bed. It's pretty funny. And like the thing that really works here is obviously the casting. Like Audrey Hepburn she's not just charming, she is genuinely funny in her like princess role. Super funny.
I didn't realize that this was her breakout.
Yeah, it's like she'd only done very small roles, and she'd been on Broadway before this, but this is her movie. Like she's credited as introducing Audrey Hepburn. The first starring role she has,
and she's 24. So, and I mean, Gregory Peck is older, not as old as he looks, because like this is in the 50s, where people in their 30s look like, and they're easily in their late 40s. So he's 36, I think.
That makes sense. Because like there's the other in Sabrina, William Holden is 35. And he looks older than me in that movie. It's crazy. On the other hand, in Funny Face, it's Fred Astaire, who's 57 and doesn't look that much older than William Holden. I feel like they just get frozen at a later age at that time in Hollywood. It's very strange.
And I mean, at least they always look good. They always look a certain way, right? There's this sort of Hollywood leading men of the 50s and 60s look between
absolutely.
It's very sort of dapper and like sort of a type. I mean, I think Cary Grant for me is still sort of the most enigmatic of them, because he had a bit of more of an edge to him that sometimes came through. Mm-hmm. Also the fact he was probably queer. Sometimes he's very he's a bit more out there, I think. Less of a like straight man, than
edge is really good way to putting it.
But it is, I mean, I also get it's Gregory Peck. Like, I don't think we need to fight about either Audrey Hepburn or Gregory Peck. I mean,
but the thing, sorry, the thing that I thought very interesting, because I was watching like literally all of the special features on the disc. There is a trailer on this, and the trailer throughout refers to him as Greg. Which is interesting, because we do this always in these movies, because it's much easier for you as an audience to understand who we're talking about if we're using the actor names. And to be fair, like the role names usually don't matter too much, so you kind of like understand. But the trailer refers to him as Greg throughout, which I thought was very interesting. And that's just a convention from that time that we've kind of dropped. Like it's kind of like this, oh, here he is again, your friend Greg, in another comedy, or he hadn't been in a lot of comedies lately, so but yeah, super interesting. The other thing, the third billed actor in this, who I don't think is talked about enough when it comes to this movie, is Eddie Albert. And I was dumbfounded. Audrey Hepburn looks like the princess that she is. I mean, she's literally descended from royalty. Gregory Peck looks like a 1940s leading man. Eddie Albert looks like a guy you know. Like, it's so weird.
Like a person.
It's so weird. He looks like he could come. He looks like you know somebody whose boyfriend this is.
Yeah, it's the reverse of iPhone face. Or he has iPhone face, like, you know, when there's actors you can't cast in historical drama. It's like Adam Sandler can't be in, like it doesn't work, or Ben Affleck or some like it's just, it doesn't work.
He's timeless. Completely timeless.
But yeah, it's timeless in a different way that Audrey Hepburn is. No, also my humble brag of the day will be that, like, obviously Gregory Peck's grandson is Ethan Peck, who's in the last years at least sort of started to have a career because he is in Star Trek, right? He's the current Spock in Star Trek, started on Star Trek Discovery, now Star Trek Strange New Worlds. But because I've spent a lot of time on Star Trek cruises and in conventions, I can humble brag that Ethan Peck stood next to me very drunk on his 30th birthday. And I actually looked up because, like, Gregory Peck was married, I think, twice. And, like, so that line is, like, from his first wife, I think, sort of. But, so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I've been to conventions where they ask Ethan if he's still met, like, he has met his grandfather, who actually died only in, I forgot now. I think it's not that he turned he got very old.
Like in the 2000s?
I do think so, early 2000s.
Because
Like he was
Audrey
born in
Hepburn.
1918, and I think Gregory Peck died in like 2003 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hepburn died in 93, which I had weirdly thought she died earlier because she'd gone so silent. Like I thought she died before I was born.
Yeah, I mean, she basically stopped making movies in the 60s. That is the interesting thing about her. And she had like a whole other life as basically a humanitarian.
Yeah, she became a mom and then she became a humanitarian and kind of just was a fashion icon and nothing else.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, she didn't disappear from public life per se, but like completely put her energy into.
She made like half a dozen movies,
like, which is a very interesting trajectory, but it like probably was the best choice she ever could have made, because she kind of checked out of Hollywood because it got more insane and she might have been forced into playing these kinds of, you know, whatever you do. I mean, to be fair, someone like Julie Andrews from sort of that generation had a career later in life and sort of carefully picked some of the parts she was going to do, but it feels like a valid choice to just go, nah, okay, I've had enough of this now. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, sort of her family history. So like her mother's Dutch, so she actually lived in the Netherlands when the Nazis occupied the Netherlands, and then sort of comes from this line of like royals, which at that point is like also just dignitaries, much like her character, right? And so it kind of makes sense that she probably chooses that life at some point. But
yeah, it's very, I mean, she basically didn't have to worry about picking the wrong movie at some point, right? Because like big stars, they make these lemon movies and then people are like, oh, can you believe she was in that? Can you believe she made that? And it's such a bad movie. That doesn't happen to you if you carefully pick the half dozen classic movies that you're going to be in and then you just nope out of it.
Kind of nope out, check out, and like call it a day, I guess, which it's fun.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's so the thing I do want to talk about this trope of the princess from nowhere, which I thought they just didn't want to name countries and didn't want to make up and invent countries. But that is not true, because when she greets this long line of dignitaries, there are made up countries in there. There's my favorite one is the Count and Countess of Liechtenstein-Holz, which sounds exactly like something you would make up that's kind of like Liechtenstein, but it's not.
My favorite too.
But obviously they're making
in the middle of saying Liechtenstein.
But they're making these up, and she doesn't have. And this is for me like weirdly the thing that took me out of the fantasy the most. Like you couldn't just use Belgravia like Conan Doyle used, or like other authors used, like a made up European nation that might have been a European nation, and just go with that, because it always is weird. And this is a pet peeve of mine in media when people refer to, we live in the city. Oh, back to the city. What is its name? Just give it a name. Just give the place, give places names, even if you have to make them up.
I mean, Princess Diaries invents Genovia, right? I mean, it feels like
that's
she
fine.
Probably, it sort of, her vibe is she's the princess of Genovia. But it is kind of that. But I mean, she also speaks like the bunch of languages, right, that do exist. But then the press is also actually from actual countries again. Like there's DPA, like there's an actual German guy.
There's two French people.
Is a German guy who's like, we're Springer, there's this Nassau so Springer, which is like a big publisher, and then DPA, like Deutsche Presse.
And like, the funny thing is when they're all like in the receiving line where she greets them, she does not greet the guy from Le Figaro in French, but the next guy from a French publication she does. And I'm like, this is an interesting choice. But yeah, you can basically tell all the languages that Audrey Hepburn speaks from who she greets in their actual language.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And I mean, I get why it's a classic, but like the plot is very quickly summed up because there isn't all that much of a plot.
They go places, they have fun. They break
a Vespa,
instruments over people's heads.
And I think it might have also charmed American audiences more because it's Rome. Like, I mean, other people are charmed by Rome, but it feels like very much the like epitome of like, what would you do if you were in Rome? I'm gonna eat gelato and I'm gonna ride a Vespa, and I think
I'm gonna go up the Spanish steps. Yeah,
like a feedback loop of, like sort of this is what people imagine Rome to be like, and then movies like this put it out there, and this is why people want to go to Rome and then do exactly those things, etc., etc.
And this movie, it's kind of crazy because I was watching a bunch of the bonus material. I was doing some research on this, and William Wyler was first told by Paramount that he should make it on the back lot, and I'm like, oh wow, would that have been a different movie, right? Because it is completely shot in Rome. It's shot on location. It's shot in,
which they immediately
in the studios there
in the opening credits, which I found interesting.
Yeah. Like, this is real. There's real, and it's one of the first Hollywood productions, right? That World War II is over, and then you might not want to shoot in Europe because they're all rebuilding. So, like, this is about 10 years after, not quite 10 years, like 8 years after. Yeah. This is probably the earliest you can actually go to Europe and actually use these European places. Yeah. And they do it well. And I was very impressed. Like, you can tell that they're making do with the technology of the time, right? When they have night scenes and there's just floodlights that would not be there just because they needed them to be there so you can see something. But they don't cheap out. They don't do like the awful day for night that you usually find in films of that era. They really make use of Rome as a location. It is really kind of it is the Roman holiday. Rome itself is kind of a character in this.
Yeah, and I do think that is very, very important, particularly to the US audience at the time, because like, when would you have seen Rome? Like, none of these like commercial, like, as I like to point out, commercial air travel to the same degree where more people can afford it doesn't really happen until the early 70s that much. Like, you can already fly to the 50s if you're wealthy enough, but it is a part of that fantasy. And again, like after World War II, like,
I mean, it's before the jet age. Like, there's a plot point where she christens an ocean liner, right? Yeah. And like the plane from her country that's supposed to pick her up or something in the end, that's a Lockheed Super Constellation. It's a propeller plane from the 50s. Like, it's a thing that exists, like, it comes out of World War II. Like, we are definitely not at that time. Like, this is the way you see Europe at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think but yeah, like let's talk about the other important sort of historical context for this, because Dalton Trumbo, the screenwriter of this film, is one of the Hollywood 10. Yeah. So he's one of the people he's actually a member of, like, a proper member of the Communist Party when McCarthyism starts in the United States. He also starts to speak out against this is happening, and he ends up on this blacklist, this famous blacklist. So who's called the Hollywood 10, which means he's no longer allowed to make movies. Is basically one of the most prominent victims of McCarthyism, maybe outside of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, that are much more directly a victim. But like, I mean, those are like, they're the exception because they get executed. But like, in terms of blacklisting and like professional consequences, we see like Lavender Scare people where we don't always have names other than like Frank Kameny, who's a gay activist who like builds his whole activism on the fact he gets fired as an astronomer. But like, in terms of visible victims, because they're part of the Hollywood elite, like Dalton Trumbo is definitely up there. And and actually Roman Holiday is, because it's from 1953, is one of the movies that he writes in exile, essentially. Like, he moves his family to Mexico.
And he gets a ploy, like a front man to basically be him.
Like, he still writes things under pseudonyms, and it actually takes until 2011 for the Writers Guild of America to reinstate his name on the credits for Roman Holiday.
They are on all of them, and they look like credits from that time. Which there was actually an interesting commentary on one of the features where one of the WGA people, I think, talks about this and says, like, yeah, on the one hand, this is great because you get this reinstated. On the other hand, people see this movie and they see the credit and they don't know about the fact that like there should be an asterisk, there should be notification of we have reinstated this. It's basically just glossed over. And I thought that was a really good observation because we want to right the wrongs, but you don't right the wrongs by completely papering over the fact that they were wrong to begin with.
Yeah. And there's a whole history there, obviously, with that. And then also Gregory Peck himself, actually, like he wasn't in the Communist Party, but he was very vocal against like the McCarthyist witch hunt within Hollywood. And actually, he was a lifelong Democrat. He was very politically active at the time. He actually ends up on Nixon's enemy list. So even after McCarthyism, someone like Nixon has a goddamn enemy list. Like it is such a weird. I guess the Cold War is such a wild time. Sorry, like there's so much people like involved in these things. Again, like Nora Ephron knowing about Deep Throat, right? It's like knowing about Mark Felt, but because sort of Hollywood is one of the kind of institutions that constantly gets watched because people are fully aware of like the power of propaganda or like what they perceive could be propaganda. I mean, Roman Holiday is definitely not like a communist ploy to like get you indoctrinated, but it's
from big gelato,
big Vespa.
Big Vespa. Yeah, it's very interesting. There's the famous, I think, press conference, or is it at the hearings where it's the Hollywood 10 all arrayed at this table with their names in front of them, and it's Dalton Trumbo right next to Ring Lardner Jr., who's one of the other really kind of famous victims of McCarthyism, and he's right there in it. And the thing that's remarkable about him, I mean, he was a member of the Communist Party. He would keep saying, right, this isn't illegal, right? This is the First Amendment. The First Amendment is what keeps America different from other countries, and we're trampling on that. And he refused to answer the question. He refused to answer the question, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? He basically doesn't deny anything. He just basically says, like, you should not be asking that question. That is the wrong thing to do. And he only comes back in to Hollywood, I think like 10, 15 years later, when Kirk Douglas and Otto Preminger are casting about for a screenwriter, and they're like, you know what, we want him and we want his name on the picture. And then it starts to slowly crumble. So he is one of the important people when this starts, and he is one of the important people when it ends. He's kind of instrumental in that sense of ending the blacklist years.
Yeah, and Peck apparently also challenges Huak. Like he doesn't want to, because I mean they keep calling in people to testify and point fingers at other people constantly. And some people do, like Walt Disney famously testifies very readily in front of the committee because I mean that's like, I'm still not one of those people who wants to like say Walt Disney was definitely an anti-Semite or whatever, like, because we don't actually have proof for that. But for his him readily testifying and for work and like working with the FBI, that is there. And it's like, he's by far not the only one, but he's definitely one of the most well-known people who like does that and doesn't oppose this because he's a Republican. And very much sort of aligns more with his politics to do that, especially because there's a famous animators strike in 1943 that like he sort of never recovers from. Like he feels super betrayed by his own people when the strike happens, and obviously strikes are connected to what is perceived as communism, which at the time we should, like, even though they're also looking at people who are in the Communist Party, communist becomes a term for like anyone who is vaguely leftist and people we don't like, which is also why then the Laverne scare happens and they kick out gays and lesbians as well because they can be blackmailed easily. And it's like, it just becomes a witch hunt against anyone who is perceived as a threat and could be a spy for the Soviet Union. So
it's very interesting because if you now looking back through history at this, the one thing that it was really, really bad at is identifying actual spies. Like this is the sad irony of it is, like there was a flourishing spy versus spy thing going on throughout Europe and the United States and the Soviet Union, and that wasn't very often uncovered. I mean, they basically just went for symbolism.
One of the I mean, it's not ironic. So, like, by now we apparently know that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were actually spies or were involved in that. But obviously, that does not justify them being executed in the way that they were either. Like, it's
a statement. It's clearly a statement.
It's like the Nazis immediately executing Sophia and Hans Scholl within the same day because you want to signal to people that's not what we're gonna do here. It is certainly an interesting time, and I watched the credits. It was like Dalton Trumbo, and I was like, wait, I do know Dalton Trumbo, and then sort of fell down this rabbit hole of okay. And the fact that he's on the credits, I thought, maybe by 53 sort of he was, but because I didn't know the details when they reinstated, and it's like, oh no, this is so much later. And also, but again, that's he wins an Academy Award, sort of basically wins 2 Academy Awards that he can't
as someone else.
Yeah.
Speaking of Academy Awards, Audrey Hepburn, this is her year. She wins the Academy Award for this for Best Actress. She wins the Golden Globe. She wins the BAFTA Award. She wins, in that same unrelated, the Tony Award. This is she breaks out in the most amazingly huge way possible.
Immediately. I mean, I would also stop working if I achieved basically. Does he immediately get EGOT status? Because Emmy is probably not because she's not a TV actor. But if you count the
but it's 53. She wins four prizes.
Yeah. But yeah.
She
I mean, she also doesn't win a Grammy, but Grammy is the G in a Golden Globe, but sort of in terms of what she can win for her status, I think.
And this is the thing that we should be talking about is the fact that the acting in this, she's very charming. She's Audrey Hepburn, but she acts that the physical humor so well, the Audrey Hepburn being drugged and kind of falling against Gregory Peck when they enter the apartment. Audrey Hepburn babbling about that she's never been in a room alone with a man and it's unusual. And then even with her dress on, with my dress off, it's most unusual. Almost falling asleep as she says it. It's just such a good delivery of these comedic moments, which is really, really funny.
What I also immediately loved as a characterization is when we first see her do her job as a dignitary and she slips out of her shoe because probably it's uncomfortable because she's wearing high heels and she has to stand the whole time, and then sort of loses the shoe and it she has trouble getting back into that, and they're trying to cover her team of people around her is trying to cover this up.
And then she starts dancing with one of the dignitaries to cover this. It's been called a Cinderella story in reverse, and that is when I understood the joke with the shoe, which is funny because it's physical comedy, but it's also very much speaks to who she is, and she's literally trying to slip out of this role even for just a little bit, and then immediately it becomes a problem.
Immediately is also a humanization, right? She is this dolled up and she looks like this fairy tale princess, but her shoes are uncomfortable, right? It works on so many levels. I thought it was a great detail.
Yeah. And then the thank you, no thank you scene where her, what's lady in waiting basically tells her schedule for the next day.
Yeah.
Makes sure she says schedule or schedule. Either one is correct. I'm like, thank you for this piece of information right here. And talks about what she does. And Audrey Hepburn always responds with, thank you, no thank you. What she's supposed to do for these things, which is one of the great comedic scenes as well.
It doesn't mean this massive schedule is actually reminded me of something Miley Cyrus once posted when she was still a teen, a child star for the Disney Channel. I was doing Hannah Montana. And she posted one of her schedules like years later, like recently, of like what her day looked like as like a 16-year-old or 15-year-old or however old she was, that starts at like 5 a.m. to get her into makeup to go and like Good Morning America or some morning show, then like basically go to the next interview and then do something else and then maybe do a rehearsal for whatever. And like it's that, right? It's like, and too young to have the agency to object and sort of, and I mean, she's also like, her dad is a country singer, right? Like she was born into this and clearly forced into this child star role. And like, I mean, with Audrey Hepburn is 24 here, but you get the idea, like, obviously she's never done anything else. Like that's her whole life. And this is also why she has that crisis and she's just following what everyone else wants her to do, which is again, why it's important that she emancipates herself and like cuts her hair short and all of this stuff. And then by the end, like sort of the last scene is obviously her like sort of deciding, well, I want to meet the press and you can't do anything about it also because we're in public, but this is what I want to do now. And then also saying her favorite place to visit was Italy, which is obviously not
Rome specifically,
like, or like Rome, like, and yeah.
Sort of. It is, you can really feel kind of the way that these like elite women are written. Like there's a little bit of Scarlett O'Hara in this. There's a little bit of kind of the whole, I think, reflection on stardom as well in this. And it's, you know, transposed to this person who is a princess. And the interesting thing about this movie is, it's not a happy ending in the traditional sense. I mean, it is not a romantic happy ending. I mean, they both kind of grow and make decisions, but then in the end both go back to their regular lives, and she goes back to her regular life having had this day in Rome, with potentially the possibility that she might be, you know, speaking for herself a little more now.
Yeah,
but none of that is clear.
Implication. Yeah. I do think that is very much the implication, that she's changed by this and is starting to speak up for herself and is trying to do things her way. And I mean, it's also like there's that moment when she comes back after sort of being lost for a day, and she's like, well, you know, if I wouldn't care about my people and my country, I wouldn't have returned now or ever. Which, she could have run away, but she like sort of goes back and takes on this role. But then that is an active choice for once that she makes. Like the whole life that wasn't a choice, but in that moment it becomes her choice. But then she will start to do it her way. And that is sort of the transformation she goes through because of her encounter with Gregory Peck. And again, like, I wonder if they don't get together also because of Hays Code stuff, or if they really make this choice of like, this is actually like the happy ending is not necessarily in. They're never supposed to be together. It's just this moment that's important.
Yeah, I wonder if there were several options on the table, and we talked about the various endings of Pretty Woman, and in Pretty Woman they went full romance, and they didn't here. And it's actually interesting because it is one of the definitive rom-coms, and it doesn't have the kind of cliche rom-com ending that we expect, which there are others where it's also kind of open. I mean, Sleepless in Seattle is open, but the implication is obviously that they're going to get together. It's not stated, but the implication is there.
I mean,
it's not.
They're together now, right? It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, for the longest time, they also thought about When Harry Met Sally, but not, with an ending that didn't get them together. And then, and actually, because I've been still reading things for the stupid paper I'm writing that's almost done, but there was a moment, like, it's important to note sort of in the tradition of rom-com that the happy ending as such a convention actually is more of a thing that comes from sometimes comes from romantic drama as well, like sort of to have this very romantic ending of them getting together more than it necessarily comes from Screwball. So 50s and 60s rom-coms, they don't always end up together, this is one of the examples, right? But that changes with sort of the neo-tradition, like what's been called the neo-traditional wave of rom-coms, which is all of the Efron films and then also Richard Curtis's stuff, where they do always end up together and have that happy ending.
And when they don't, it's a big thing, right? My Best Friend's Wedding is kind of the only one of these big ones where they don't end up together, and you understand why. And it was kind of sold as, oh, this is one where it's different. But then you'd go like 40, 50 years back in movie history, and this is very, I mean, Billy Wilder is a specialist at this kind of stuff. So it feels, and what I like about this is they don't overtax the fantasy, right? She's a princess. He happens to run into him, and in the end, they part ways because that is the realistic thing to happen. This is the thing, right? The funny thing is and it's referenced there, like the fairy tale is finite. This is a temporary fairy tale, and it feels very much like, you know, like this is kind of classic hero's journey stuff, right? They go into the other place, and then they both come back changed, but they go back to their normalcy. And their normalcy is he's a reporter. He's not entirely happy with his station. And she is a princess who wasn't entirely happy with it, but kind of made peace with that for a moment. The fun way that she describes basically what her job is when she talks about her dad, who is obviously the king, and that he can't quit his job, and that his job is in public relations, which is just, I mean, this film is from 1953, and I feel like a lot of people still haven't understood this about current royalty, that's what the job is. It's super, super on the nose.
Yeah, and I mean, we also did Red, White, Royal, Blue, like that. That is just that the dimension of like the other person also has that kind of life, and so they for once they connect over the fact they both stuck in these kinds of lives, and one of them has more agency than the other, and but especially the royal one is always the one that is like in these insane structures you can't get out of. And I think it's an interesting thing that like obviously later on then the royalty of our time also definitely turns into the celebrity, right? The massive movie star that Julia Roberts is in real life at the time, and in her character in Notting Hill, which sort of doubles that, which also doubles it like in a way of, you know, Audrey Hepburn actually being descending from royalty. I think that is also like, if we like really think about this trajectory, also specifically because the ending scene is sort of the Notting Hill is the alternate version of the press conference. Also makes sense, which again sort of confirms true. It never could have been anyone but Julia Roberts, because if you had tried to do Notting Hill with someone who wasn't a massive star at the time, I think that would have been way harder to pull off. You needed a person that people already accept as sort of, or like that has that vibe, but like it works even better because Julia Roberts actually is at that.
Which makes it all the more
modern royalty, right?
Which makes it all the more impressive that Audrey Hepburn pulls this off in her first role. That's she has that presence immediately, and she is also she's not the typical kind of Hollywood movie star that is built up, because you have like kind of like the independent woman in the mold of Katharine Hepburn. I don't know why I like the two Hepburn. Why are people not called Hepburn anymore? We had two of them. We have none now.
And they weren't even related.
No. The studio tried to get Audrey to change her name because people would be confused. I'm like, it's very unlikely. But or we have kind of like the blonde Marilyn Monroe bombshell type, and she fits neither of that mold.
Yeah, but like the fact that she's not the bombshell type is intentional. So there's some discussions that I think are like referenced on basically just the Wikipedia for this, but she sort of sets off a wave of also like changing beauty standards. Like Audrey Hepburn becomes this like body type, and like also fashion icon, and embrace the Breakfast at Tiffany's later, and so on and so forth, obviously. But even with this, immediately it's a conscious choice not to cast anyone that would also fit more of an Italian body type at the time, sort of have that more, like, I don't know, Sophia Loren probably, or like someone in that. But like also the Marilyn Monroe is very much still, this is 53, so Marilyn Monroe is like the body type of the time and the look of the time for a movie star. And then Audrey Hepburn comes along, and that actually is like sort of a very different type.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole like new look. Also her collaboration essentially with Givenchy, which makes her into the fashion icon. And yeah, the body type. I mean, Twiggy is not really imaginable without Audrey Hepburn having been kind of the standard before that. Also, the pixie cut and all of that, which is the transformation that happens in this movie.
We should actually do some like a talk at some point. I do think
we should. The thing that I realized watching this, even if the pacing is a little bit unconventional for us today, we should really look at some of these older ones just because they also help us understand. I've seen so many of these and saw them at an age where I really couldn't contextualize them correctly, and so now just this understanding of the press conference, like the Princess Switch, the Princess Diaries, and Notting Hill all owe so much to this movie, and that's really something that I think we should be exploring. So let's do some like a tot.
I mean, Some Like a Tot is actually one of those that I've seen more than once, and like I mean, I do notice when that's reference, and it's also such a
we should do a whole bunch of Billy Wilder just because he's
Billy
clearly
Wilder
funny too. That's something. There's a whole, I mean, we have some time.
More of this sort of like we can also history nerd very well with Billy Wilder, so like everyone look forward to maybe doing more of them, although we already like sort of have a list for like the fall, and
it's
does not
fine. We can change the list,
but like we will see.
We can change the list. We should do the thing that's fun for us to do, because I think that's going to be interesting for you out there to listen to.
The 5 people.
The 5 people. Maybe it's going to be 6 if we do the things we really care about. Just shooting for 6.
I mean, to be fair, the list we have now, I think, is also we care about. But
there's a couple of scenes in there which I really related to, and one of them is, I related to not because this is me, but because they again touched something off. There's a whole scene where Gregory Peck comedically carries a watermelon, and I kept wondering if the Dirty Dancing one comes from that, because he literally carries a watermelon as he's trailing Audrey Hepburn, and then he tries to get rid of it.
We need to do Dirty Dancing. I don't know, we haven't put this on the list, but like I love Dirty Dancing.
And the other thing, and I don't know if you noticed this, I noticed this so much because if you look at Gregory Peck in this movie, the comedic Gregory Peck, the through line to someone like Pierce Brosnan is just so palpable. It's crazy how a lot of actors that are still working, that are still alive, obviously grew up on things like that and took their ideas, their
looks. It's also the Irish, like a lot of them.
And that's the role he kind of like plays. Like when he's cast for Remington Steele in the 80s, he basically plays a version of Gregory Peck, or a combination of these old movie stars. And I mean, it's very referential because they also reference back to these old movies, and old movie stars show up in that show. And the intertextuality is just there. And I think it's often when we watch things today, we sometimes don't understand choices when we don't figure out what the context is, or where something very directly comes from and what it's related to. So in that sense, this is really a good one for us to do, not just because we can contextualize it within the production of it, right? The stuff that's going on politically there. The time frame as well. They talk about European Federation, which is I'm going to go back to the wonderful quote that Gregory Peck gives to his editor, the fake quote that she had about European Federation. Yet that's going on. The treaties of Rome are happening like 4 years after this. The European Community of Coal and Steel has already been founded. This is current when people talk about it, and all of this is kind of leading up to the way that this movie is playing out at its time. And I think I lost a little bit of track where I was going with this, but I hope most of it made it through.
Do we like want to sort of wrap up? I mean, it feels like we don't need to talk about reviews all that much with this. This still has a 98 critics on Rotten Tomatoes, because obviously some people rewatch it, but also like everything combined, and then a 92 audience score. I think it's also a lot of people have nostalgia for this film, obviously older generations, but also younger that sort of then watched it as a kid with their parents or something.
Or like watched the movies it was inspired by.
Yeah, it's not me in this case, but I do get it. Like
the 8% is people like you who don't like the pacing.
I mean, I don't think it's bad. It's just like, I also, when I watched it today, I was just tired. I think that didn't help. Like, sort of the mindset of like, oh, I have to do this now because we're gonna record this. But like, generally,
I watched it.
If it had come on, it's one of those things. If it had come on at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night on like German TV, I would have stayed up with my mom watching until 1 a.m. or something, like that kind of vibe. So yeah.
So it certainly is that, but it is also, I mean, asking our question, is this a romantic comedy? It doesn't have the typical romantic comedy ending. We talked about, screwball versus rom-com versus all of that. It's clearly a comedy. I had a couple of out loud laughs as I was watching this, mostly related to physical comedy and to Audrey Hepburn's delivery of things. One scene, there's two scenes that I think we need to talk about, and one of them is where in the kind of later part of it, for like a minute and a half, it becomes a silent movie when they're picked up by the police, and the police who are looking for this lost princess, and then she has to explain herself to them, and they make up some story about a marriage, and all you get is this montage of them at the police with music playing over it, and at some point the wedding march comes on. I'm like, oh, okay, this is their story that they're telling them, and then it's later referenced. But for like a good minute and a half, it just becomes a silent movie, and it's just kind of this charming thing that happens in the middle of the movie, and they get into all kinds of hijinks. She actually, in these the fights that are ensuing, where the people who are after Audrey Hepburn to re-princessize her, she is not kind of she's not passive. She really like is fighting back, and she there's the great picture which we see at the end where she breaks the violin or whatever it is, or somebody said, and she actually fights back against the guy who is attacking both of them when they're by the river, when they end up when Gregory Peck is basically thrown into the river, and then Jeet jumps in, but she fights back with that as well, which is interesting because the image of femininity that is presented here is very much a 50s kind of. She kind of wants to be free, but she also wants to be a housewife. She talks about how she can cook and she can clean, she can do all these things and learn all these things, but she can never use them. And that is such a dream caught within its society, right? Yeah. She doesn't dream of being an independent woman out there in the world, being a reporter herself or whatever. She dreams of being a regular housewife, which is very much in the keeping.
Yeah, obviously, but I think it's also the contrast of like, you never get to do anything for yourself. You don't make those choices, and sort of having that. But yeah, obviously in 53, her dreams were still going to be limited by what they're allowed to do.
Yeah, we're like post-war now, right? We're not in the war. We're not in the war effort where a lot was possible.
We're in the war effort, but we're in the Cold War effort.
It's a different effort.
Be very domestic and like tout our fancy new kitchens and show to the Soviet Union that our women don't have to work because we're so rich, and and
there's a lot of funny Italian cliches. I don't know how offended Italians would be by this, probably to certain degrees by this movie. They, for the most part, they work, and they're kind of used well. My favorite piece of physical comedy is after they leave the police station. And they're kind of celebrated for their fake wedding or whatever the construction is. And there's this one very Italian looking kind of looks like he could be like a pizza maker in like a New York Italian kind of a vibe, who basically goes around, and it's the three of them. It's Audrey Hepburn, it's Gregory Peck, and it's Eddie Albert. And he kisses Audrey Hepburn, then he turns to Gregory Peck and kisses him on both cheeks. Then he turns to Eddie Albert and just basically looks at him and just shakes his hand. And it's just such a funny diss. that just comes out of nowhere, but really gives this kind of a life. Like this person who is like, oh yeah, no, you're not interesting.
But it always aged badly when some stranger randomly kisses a woman on the mouth. But like, yeah. But yeah, it's, I mean, again, I think it's clear. Also, what I liked is that, like, she calls herself Anya at first, which, like, if you've ever seen Anastasia, where it's also the princess who loses her, in this case, loses her memory, and then the guy knows who she is. She also calls herself Anya, which I think is deliberate. Which is also one of those things I got now, so, you know.
I'm wondering about, because like she's called Princess Anne, if that's just the country that she's supposed to be from. She's actually Anya, and Anne is like, you know, like the kings always are often the names are translated.
When they do it in Anastasia, it feels like very much the Roman holiday, because there's all these parallels things. But do we want to do taglines, because there's a really stupid ones that are probably all from 53 and ripped from like the trailer.
Let's do the real ones, and then let's do the taglines.
So there's just like, it's sheer joy, the picture that lifts your happiness high, and then there's more text. It's like, it ends in a riot of 1954 style fun, where I'm like, but it's 53. Are you saying this movie is ahead of its time? I don't know what's going on. A story of today as modern as tomorrow, which is the most 50th thing I've ever heard for anything. And then there's the gayest spree a girl ever had.
I love that one.
Back in the day when things were still gay, but
like happy. Yeah.
Again, if it were Cary Grant, it would probably be both. Lived, loved, and filmed in Rome.
Yes. Yes, I noticed.
Also, by the way, when they brought this up with
Live, Love, Film, that's going to be my inspirational poster.
That's going to be weird, but also when the like title card comes up, it's like completely filmed, and we filmed all of this in Rome. I waited for no Italians were harmed in making of this.
But some were harmed. You throw them in the water, you hit them over the head with instruments.
And romance in romantic Rome. Someone was just like
all of those words have something in common. Rome for some romance. Yeah.
Anyway, that's
yeah. I would just like to remark that the hand bitten off joke is always funny, and played perfectly by Gregory Peck in this one.
Yeah.
Also the photographer best friend, who is portrayed in like a very Billy Wilder movie kind of way here, runs around with like there's a bunch of hijinks regarding him trying to get pictures of the princess, and one of them involves him having a Zippo lighter camera, and I kept wondering, that can't be real, which it turns out was a real thing, like existed in the 1950s, and apparently they're collectibles now. And if you go on the internet and search for the Echo 8 Zippo lighter camera, they advise you to not put lighter fluid into it, because it's no longer going to keep it in there. So like, don't demonstrate the lighter, just use the camera. Fake taglines, I think, is where we're at.
Yeah, I actually need to think, because already like no Italians were harmed in making this movie.
I mean, it's a good one. It's a good one.
I might stick with that, or the original Princess Diaries, or watch this movie and you will finally get so many things you always missed in other things.
Yeah. Mine is Big Gelato presents Roman Holiday.
Big Vespa. I'm still stuck on Big. I honestly think this is why Americans think of Vespas when they think of Italy. I can't prove it.
It has reached,
but it's there, because that is the whole thing. If you go to the Italy Pavilion in Epcot, they often have merchandise with like Mickey and Minnie on a Vespa. It's so ingrained in that sort of imagination. And I feel like if you're from Germany and so close to Italy, Vespa is not necessarily a thing.
No, it's just a thing that young people
gelato, yes, but like Vespa, no. And then even like the Pixar film Luca has like important Vespa scenes, and
there's tons of Italian movies also from the time in which that happens, and this is what they get.
It feels like way more ingrained in sort of the American imagination of Italy than if you're from if you're from Europe. But yeah, anyway.
Big Vespa approves.
Big Vespa approves. Anyway, yeah, I think that's it. Is it? I don't have anything else on my notes.
Happy Roman holiday, everyone.